burnout, disconnection, conflict, the unhealthy kind, the unhelpful kind. What makes sense? Where to?
I mean, the one, I don't know about you, but the one that I've been hearing about most from people is burnout.
Let's talk about burnout. I think it's a topic. It's a thing.
Yeah. So let's maybe throw out some other words, other feelings. This is a good way for us to practice our feelings wheel and articulate our feelings. But I've heard overwhelmingness, stress. What are some other ones you've heard?
Fatigue, exhaustion, overwhelm.
Tired. Yeah. So if you're feeling any of those or observing anybody feeling these at all levels, let's dig into that.
Yeah. So, when I think about burnout, there's a couple of, it's interesting because it's a set of symptoms, right? It's that like overwhelmed, tiredness, exhausted, frustrated, angry, depressed, anxious, addiction, like all of these things are actually, I think, manifest as a result of burnout or can manifest as a result of burnout. And I guess there's a couple of different pathways. Like, how do we get to a place of burnout? And so maybe it's story time. Actually, maybe it's, Pablo, I know you've burnt out or been close to burnout. I've certainly burnt out in a workplace before. We can explore burnout maybe a little bit through our own journey. And so while you're thinking about that for yourself, I can explore a little bit of that for me. When I think about my own burnout journey and experience, one, it had been normalized in the system that I was a part of. And so the first half of my career, I would say, which is hard because I was 12 years, which means I'm getting older. So half a career spent in addiction and mental health. So working first as a youth worker and then as a supervisor and leader and, up into management and directorship roles. And burnout was such a normal characteristic of the work that it became just this like expected that people were going to burn out and that we wouldn't get very much of a lifespan out of a worker in that sector because the work was emotionally demanding and exhausting. The hours spent, there were 16-hour days. Like we were exempt from lots of labor laws because of the nature of our program. We could work people 16 hours a day for 4 or 5 days in a row in the wilderness, and they'd get an hour break that we wouldn't take. Like there was a culture of not taking our breaks and caring for ourselves because we were so focused on caring for the other person. And so I think that's maybe unique to the helping services, and certainly the nonprofit sector has that pathological helping where we center other people's needs instead of our own. And I think that sets the recipe, that sets the conditions for burnout to occur because, just because I'm not meeting my needs doesn't mean they're not there. They exist and they're going unmet. And if they go unmet long enough, we hit what Woodry would call a limit, right? We just hit the actual, I have no more capacity, I have nothing left to give. And then we get those downstream side effects of anxiety, depression, fatigue, all of these things. And so I distinctly remember I was in a leadership role. The conditions were ripe for burnout for me when I look back on it. And I had a panic attack standing at my desk. Right? I had the sweats and nausea and my face went white. My hands started to shake. I thought I'd been hit by the 24-hour flu because, my mental health had been pretty stable up until that point and has been largely since. And so I go into the washroom and I splash some water on my face and I drive home and go to the doctor and he sits me down and he puts me in front of a computer like this and I start answering a screening questionnaire. And of course I've seen lots of these screening questionnaires working in addiction and mental health. I'm like, oh shit, like I'm about to diagnose myself with an anxiety disorder. And sure enough, out popped a moderate anxiety disorder, right? Which is a symptom of this burnout that I was experiencing, right? And lots of conditions were ripe for it. There was a lot of years of just grinding away. There was a lack of support in the system. There was feeling a lack of connection or meaning in that. There were some misuses and abuses of power happening for sure that I was having to respond to that were stressing me out. So lots of factors go into burnout. But those, the primary one for me upon reflection was lack of meaningful connection. So actually being disconnected and then those misuses of power and the stress that those were causing. And what's interesting is that our solutions for burnout are often very individual. Jeff, take a leave from work. Jeff, go for long walks in nature. Jeff, take a little bit of anti-anxiety medication. Jeff, go to therapy. Didn't solve the misuses of power problem. Didn't solve the lack of meaningful connection problem. It's like Band-Aid for Jeff to get him back to functioning and then throw him right back into the same workplace, which I lasted another year or two. And then it's like, yeah, I'm out. So that was my kind of experience, my primary experience with burnout. And then I think I've gotten better at noticing, right, when I'm getting to the edge and being able to avoid kind of hitting that wall as hard as we sometimes do. But when you think about burnout, your own journey with it, over to you. Yeah,
I mean, there's some similarities there. It's funny when you asked that question, my first thought went to a conversation we had here earlier with the manager of the studio that we're in today. And I believe like him, I'm a first generation Canadian, so my parents are immigrants. And, it's what I saw growing up was you do what you have to do to support your family, even at the own expense of your health. My father traveled lots, worked long hours. My mom did as well. Took care of us. And so like that started from the system that we were a part of in Canada. It was very different than where they came from in France. We've heard about, there's pros and cons, but it's very different work-life design. And my dad's from Peru. Very different work-life design from France even. And so I grew up with like seeing that behavior and thinking, well, that's what you have to do. Everything for it's not even the sake of, it's, at the fear of losing, right? Mm-hmm. And so, then I played competitive sports. So there's a bit of a culture there. Again, the coaches can make a big difference in that. But when I started joining, I went right into the corporate world, global real estate organization. And they focused in on your needs as a way to motivate you, let's just say. So more money, bigger title, more responsibility, really fast before you're prepared. And just to give people a sense of like what burnout looked like for me, it was some of the behaviors. I would sleep with my phone under my pillow. This might be some of you out there. The sound of a ding on my phone would just like dopamine, like just get me fired up. I was operating in a place of fear, and unfortunately, we talk about limits and boundaries. And my wife's a psychologist now. I'm learning more and more about we all deal with stress, distress differently. For me, I was not connected to my body, so I didn't know what really was happening. I'd have these moments of like turn red in the face, get super angry, I think I had a couple panic attacks as well, I remember. But deep down, something was going on in my body, and I ended up started passing blood. So that's what burnout looked like to me. I was passing blood. But I didn't know anything about limits, boundaries, ethical self-care, more than just going for a massage or, not that there's anything wrong. I love massages or drinking tea and doing yoga. They all have benefits. Mm-hmm. But, for me, it was burnout turned into me, fast forward 10 years later, having to have my large intestine removed, having to have a bag for a year. Wow. And that's just the physical, tangible things. My relationship with my wife, with my children, all those things have been impacted by being burnt out, not having the capacity, to be who I am, I guess, in a cliche way.